We are here today with Professor Luis Rivera-Pagán, a important and very important voice from Puerto Rico, a theological voice that has helped generations of people ready to think about theology. And Dr. Pagán, thank you very much for this interview. And I'd like to ask you to start, if you can tell us a little bit about your story, about your trajectory. About the things that you did and why you did what you did. Can you tell us something about you?
Well, very briefly, I'm Luis Rivera-Pagán. I am from Puerto Rico. When I was studying at the University of Puerto Rico, I came under the influence of people like Justo González, who's an important Latino Hispanic theologian. And then I switched, and instead of becoming a medicine doctor, I went to the Evangelical Seminary of Puerto Rico, did there my undergraduate theological studies, and then went to the University of Yale in New Haven and did my PhD in history of Christian thought. From then on, I have been professor at the Evangelical Seminary in Puerto Rico, at the University of Puerto Rico, in the Faculty of Humanities, for almost a decade at the Princeton Theological Seminary. I am now an emeritus professor of Princeton Theological Seminary. I'm back in Puerto Rico, and from time to time I go places and either participate in theological dialogues or give lectures. For example, this year I went to Beirut in Lebanon to participate in a symposium on conciliarity. What does conciliarity mean? Then some weeks later I went to Germany to an Evangelische Academy of Geistmann to give a lecture on the issues of how to read the Hebrew Bible in the context of Palestine and Israel, that serious problem there in the Middle East. Then I went to Geneva to be a member of the Ecumenical Global Network on Migration and gave a lecture on migration. I have also taught this semester at the Evangelical Seminary of Puerto Rico. I went to the annual gathering of the World Baptist Alliance in Santiago de Chile in July, give a couple of lectures, one of them on migration, another on the political and public affairs from a theological standpoint. And next week I will be in Ecuador in a meeting of a journal of the Latin American Council of Churches. And then the end of October and the first week of November I will be giving the Cátedra Carnahan lectures of the seminary, the Instituto Superior de Educación Teológica in Buenos Aires. So that's what I do.
Wonderful. And what was it that influenced you, Dr. Pagán, in your thinking? Like a book, a person, an event?
Several things. One, an event that took place almost 50 years ago. Was December of 1962. I was a college student, and I was invited to participate in the first Life and Mission in Latin America, Life and Mission of the Church in Latin America, sponsored by the World Student Christian Federation. So I went to Mexico. It was the first time that I went outside of Puerto Rico or the U.S. territory, or the U.S. frontiers, and that was quite an event. It was early 60s, and the roots of Latin American liberation theology, and we received lectures by people like Leopoldo Sea, Mauricio Lopez, and that really marked me. So that's one event. A person that was very influential in my decision to study history of Christian thought was, as I said already, Justo González, who's an extremely important historian of theology and of the church, a Latino Hispanic theologian formerly from Cuba, and now for decades living in Georgia. And then readings of people books written by people like Harnack, for example, which really, and St. Augustine. I think the City of God was extremely influential in those times for me. When I was in college, I was also beginning to read some of the books of the early Christian theologians like Irenaeus, Origen, and so on. So I really became very enthusiastic about that, and that's still marking my life.
Wonderful. And so from this trajectory and for so long already doing theology, how would you describe or define theology? What's the doing of theology, Professor?
Well, theology is a conversation, basically. It's a conversation that one has with God, with the sacred scriptures, with the tradition. Sometimes Protestant theologians do not give us much importance to tradition. Well, yeah, I mean, there are already 2 millennia of people who have engaged in this kind of conversation. And every time I did my dissertation, for example, on Irenaeus, that's the 2nd century. So every time one goes to a person who is really engaged in trying to read the Bible, think about God, and also reflect upon the historical context in which that person is living. That's a very complex conversation. You know, we are now used to have this kind of hermeneutical circular dialectic. One reads the Bible, one reads tradition, one reads context, and the result of that conversation is always unexpected. Early this year, for example, I was invited by the International Department of the United Bible Societies to converse about how to read the transformation of our world from the standpoint of the Bible. And I began by saying, you know what? It's not only the word that is in a process of transformation. It's our understanding of the biblical scripture that is also always in a process of transformation. How do we read, for example, the role and place of women in the church and society? When we go to the Bible, we now do not look at some text, there was sometimes in the tradition, people used to read those texts. Or in terms, for example, the conversation that took place in some century about slavery. See? The Bible was quoted in favor of slavery. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But then, now, we go to those texts and say, or for example, the issue of evolution, Darwin, and this entire conversation about creationism, divine design, the evolution of the species. It's not only the scientific dialogue that is being changed, it's also the way we see the Bible, and we read the Bible. So that's what. Mm-hmm. Let's take politics. Sometimes people used to read the Bible and say, you know, there will always be poor among you. We quote Jesus. And that text was constantly repeated as a kind of legitimation of poverty. Now we go to the Bible and usually begin with those prophetic texts in which the crown of Israel is chastised because the king has not paid attention to the plight of the poor, or the orphans, or the widows, or the aliens. So this is what a theologian does, and it's a very complex issue. David Tracy, the Roman Catholic American theologian, in Analogical Imagination says that the theologian has to deal with 3 different kinds of contexts. Usually he is in a theological institution, university, so therefore he has to deal with the academic context. So he has to think, give lecture, write, and be truly an academician. but also he or she is also a member of a church. And he or she is expected also to write and give lectures and say things and write things that might be important for the people of the church. But also he or she is a member of a society. Society with many different issues and problems and debates and dialogues. And the theologian is also supposed to be a participant in those dialogue, debates, and conversations, which means that sometimes is dealing with the academic context, sometimes he or she is in a church, sometimes he or she is participating in a debate that is being conflictively discussed in society, which means that we have to work a lot.
Right, right.